I opened the kitchen drawer to grab a spoon, and that's when I saw it. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, was standing right there in my living room, laughing at something on her phone, wearing my dead wife's earrings. Not similar ones, not inspired by. My wife's actual earrings. The ones I had bought Eleanor for our 30th wedding anniversary. The ones I had held in my hands at the funeral home and whispered, "She won't be buried without these, so our grandkids can have them someday." My hand froze around that spoon. My chest went tight. The room got smaller. She didn't even notice me standing there. She just kept laughing at her phone. Those little pearl and gold drops swinging from her ears like they belonged to her. Like they had always belonged to her. Like my wife had never existed. I said nothing. I put the spoon back, walked to the back porch, sat down in my old chair, and stared at the yard Eleanor used to tend every single spring. And I made a decision that afternoon that I would not say one word until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Because something told me those earrings weren't the whole story. I was right. My name is Raymond Earl Whitfield. I am 67 years old. I spent 34 years working as a building inspector for the city of Columbus, Ohio, which means I have spent most of my adult life looking at things other people miss. A crack in a foundation that looks fine from the outside. A beam that seems solid until you tap it and hear how hollow it sounds. A beautiful house that looks perfect on the surface, but is one bad storm away from collapsing. I thought I left that job behind when I retired 4 years ago. Turns out I just brought those skills home with me. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 2.5 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought it for 3 years, and she did it with more grace than I could have ever managed. Eleanor was the kind of woman who apologized to the nurse when her phone beeped too loud because she didn't want to disturb anyone. She made me laugh every single day of our 38 years together, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. When she passed, something in the house shifted permanently, like a photograph that was slightly crooked on the wall for years, and you only noticed it was gone when someone took it down. The house was still there. The furniture was still there. I was still there. But the thing that made it a home had left with her. I have one son. His name is Derek. He is 41 years old, and he married Vanessa about 6 years ago. I tried to like Vanessa. I genuinely did. Eleanor liked her, or at least Eleanor was polite enough to never say otherwise, which with Eleanor was practically the same thing. Vanessa was sharp, organized, always seemed to be managing something. She worked in real estate. She drove a car that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. And she was always on her phone like the whole world was waiting on her personally. After Eleanor passed, Derek and Vanessa started coming around more often, which I appreciated. A grieving old man rattling around in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs needs company. They would come for dinner on Sundays sometimes, help with things around the house. Check in. It felt good. It felt like family was showing up the way family is supposed to. Derek would ask about bills sometimes. He started helping me with some of the paperwork Eleanor used to handle, because Eleanor had always been better with that sort of thing than I was. He set up some accounts online for me, helped me understand the new bank portal, said it would make things easier. I thought it was kindness. I am telling you this now, so you understand what I mean when I say I was not a suspicious man by nature. I was not looking for problems. I was just a grieving widower who was grateful his son was nearby. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. But I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories matter. Hit that subscribe button right now, and let's prove her wrong together. Now, back to those earrings. After I sat on that porch for about an hour, I went back inside and watched Vanessa more carefully for the rest of that evening. She and Derek stayed for dinner. I cook spaghetti, which is the only thing I have truly mastered since Eleanor passed. And everything else I make is essentially an experiment with varying levels of casualties. I watched Vanessa's hands, her wrists, her ears. She wore the earrings all evening, and not once did she mention them. Not once did she say, "Oh, Ray, I hope it's okay, I found these." Or, "Derek thought it might be nice if I kept something of Eleanor's." Nothing. Just wore them like they were Tuesday. I watched Derek too. He looked normal, talked about work, complained about the highway construction on 270, asked if the gutters needed cleaning before fall. Totally normal. Either he didn't know she had the earrings, or he did know and had decided not to mention it, which was worse. After they left, I went to the bedroom. Eleanor's jewelry box was still on her dresser. I had not touched it in 2.5 years. I didn't have the heart to move it. Her perfume bottle was still there too, which I knew was irrational, but nobody had ever accused grief of being reasonable. I opened the jewelry box. I am not a jewelry expert. I couldn't tell you the difference between a sapphire and a blue piece of glass from 20 feet. But I knew Eleanor's jewelry the way you know your own kitchen. Not because you memorized every item, but because you know when something's wrong. You know when the pantry feels off even before you figure out what's missing. The earrings were gone, obviously, but I kept looking. And as I stood there, I started to feel that inspector instinct kick in. The tap the beam feeling. Something was hollow. 3 other pieces felt wrong. A gold bracelet Eleanor had received from her mother. A small diamond pendant on a thin chain that I had given her for our 20th anniversary. A pair of sapphire studs that her sister had given her for her 60th birthday. I couldn't be sure. I hadn't inventoried this box, but I knew. The way you know. I closed the box and sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the carpet for a long time. Then I thought about my brother Walter. Walter is 72. He's 5 years older than me, and he has always been the responsible one, or at least that's what he thought. Walter was always organized, always had a plan. He was an accountant for 40 years. He retired, moved to a smaller place. And then about 3 years ago, he started showing signs of early dementia. It progressed faster than any of us expected. By the time Eleanor passed, Walter was already in Meadow Ridge Care Home out in Gehenna, about 20 minutes from my house. I visited Walter every 2 weeks. It was like clockwork. I would bring him a bag of those peanut butter crackers he always loved, and we would sit in the common room, and I would tell him things even when he couldn't follow the conversation, because being there felt like the right thing to do. Some visits he knew exactly who I was, and we would laugh and talk for hours. Some visits he looked at me like I was a very polite stranger who had wandered in. I had last visited about 3 weeks before the earring incident. He seemed okay. A little quieter than usual, but okay. The morning after I found the jewelry box, I decided to drive out to Meadow Ridge. Not because I had a specific reason, just because when the world feels wrong, sometimes you go to the people who remind you what real feels like. I drove out on a Thursday morning. It was October. The trees along the highway were doing the thing they do in Ohio where they go absolutely ridiculous with color, like they're trying to make up for 7 months of gray sky all at once. I signed in at the front desk. Linda, one of the nurses who always remember my name, came over to greet me, and she had a look on her face that I can only describe as carefully controlled concern. The kind of look a doctor wears when they are deciding how to start a conversation. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I'm glad you came in. We actually had a note to call you." "Is Walter all right?" I said. "He's stable," she said, which is one of those answers that technically says yes, but emotionally says no. She walked me to a small office near the nurse's station and sat down across from me and folded her hands on the desk and said, "I want you to know, this is something we take very seriously." She told me that over the past several weeks, they had noticed Walter becoming increasingly agitated during certain visits, specifically visits from a woman who had been coming in and identifying herself as his family member. She had been signing in as V. Whitfield, which had not raised any flags initially because the staff assumed she was a daughter-in-law or niece. V. Whitfield, I said. Yes, Linda said. Vanessa's last name, after marrying Derek, was Whitfield. Linda said that on at least 2 occasions, this woman had been seen in Walter's room going through his personal belongings. When staff had asked if she needed help finding something, she said she was looking for his reading glasses. The first time, they accepted it. The second time, one of the newer nurses had mentioned it in her notes because something fell off. They had pulled the sign-in log. She had visited 6 times in the past 2 months. I had visited twice in that same period. Walter, on days when he was more lucid, had apparently told one of the overnight nurses that his watch was gone. Walter's watch, a 1974 Omega Seamaster that our father had left him. Walter had worn that watch for nearly 50 years. I sat in that small office and I felt the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. We should have caught this sooner, Linda said. And I'm sorry we didn't. Does my son know? I asked. She hesitated, just a half second. But Linda had an honest face, and that half second told me everything. The contact number we have on file was updated about 4 months ago, she said. We had your number as the primary contact originally. Someone called and said there had been a change and provided a new primary number. What number? I asked. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. I recognized the number immediately. It was Derek's cell. Now I want you to stay with me here, because this is the part where most people would have gone straight home and had a very loud, very messy confrontation. And I understand that impulse completely. I am not a patient man by nature. Eleanor used to say I had the patience of a man standing in the wrong grocery line, which is accurate and also deeply unfair, because I always pick the wrong line. But I am also a building inspector, and building inspectors know that before you condemn a structure, you gather evidence. You document. You don't walk into a house and start swinging a sledgehammer because you think something's wrong. You find out what's actually wrong first, and then you swing. I drove home from Meadow Ridge. I did not call Derek. I did not text. I walked into the house, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I did not drink, and I started making a list. Eleanor's missing jewelry. Walter's missing watch. Vanessa's unsanctioned visits to the care home. Derek's name put as primary contact at Meadow Ridge, cutting me out. Derek's access to my online banking portal that he had set up for my convenience. That last one sat on the list and stared back at me. I pulled up the bank portal on my laptop. I had never really learned to navigate it well because Derek had always just done it for me when something needed checking. Eleanor had handled the finances for decades, and after she passed, I was basically a golden retriever trying to understand a spreadsheet. I stared at the screen for a while. Then I called my neighbor Barbara, who was 64, retired, and sharp as a letter opener. Barbara had worked in banking for 30 years, and after her husband Frank passed, she had nothing to do but tend her garden and become dangerously good at crosswords. I trusted Barbara completely. She had brought food every single day for the first month after Eleanor died without being asked or making a big deal of it. That's the kind of person Barbara is. I asked Barbara to come over and help me understand what I was looking at. She was at my door in 11 minutes. I timed it. Barbara sat down at the laptop and spent about 20 minutes going through things quietly while I stood behind her and tried not to hover. She asked a few questions, pulled up a few screens. Then she turned around and looked at me with that careful expression that people get when they are about to say something they wish they didn't have to say. Ray, she said, when is the last time you looked at your savings account? I told her honestly that I had not looked at it since Eleanor was alive, because Eleanor had managed it, and after she died, I had sort of emotionally quarantined that entire part of my life. Someone has been making withdrawals, Barbara said. Regular ones, not huge, but consistent. She printed out a summary because Barbara is old school and believes information is more real when you can hold it in your hand. We laid it out on the kitchen table. Over the past 18 months, there had been 23 separate transfers out of my savings account, each one between $800 and $1,500, always just below thresholds that might trigger an alert, always spaced out enough to look irregular but not systematic, unless you laid them all side by side. Total, $24,400. I sat with that number for a long time, and I thought about Walter. Walter, who was a retired accountant with his own modest savings. Walter, who had dementia and couldn't track his own finances. Walter, who had a missing $8,000 Omega Seamaster on his wrist 3 months ago and nothing there now. I thought about the earrings, about Eleanor's bracelet, her pendant, her sapphire studs. And then for the first time since Eleanor died, I felt something other than grief. I felt a very focused, very clear, very cold kind of anger. And I decided it was time to set a trap. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to take a quick pause here because what I did next required some help, and I am not too proud to say that. I am a 67-year-old man whose technical knowledge effectively ends at changing a light bulb. I needed people, good people. If you're still with me right now and this story is hitting somewhere real for you, please subscribe and drop comment. It helps more than you know, because stories about people who fight back deserve to be told, and I want to keep telling them. The trap had 2 parts. The first part was the house. I called a guy named Phil, who I knew from my years as a building inspector. Phil did security work now, cameras, systems, the whole thing. He was a no-nonsense man who owned approximately 47 flannel shirts and had never in his life made small talk. I called him on a Friday morning and told him I wanted 4 cameras installed in my house. Indoor, discreet. He asked me if I wanted to tell him why. I said no. He said okay. He was at my house by noon. Phil installed one in the living room, disguised in the shelf of books behind Eleanor's old reading chair. One in the hallway outside the bedroom. One in the kitchen. One covering the front door. All feeding to an app on my phone. I did not tell Derek or Vanessa. The second part of the trap was the bait. I called Barbara back and asked her to help me with something specific. I wrote a letter, old-fashioned on paper, in handwriting that I deliberately made look shakier than usual because I wanted it to look like something an elderly man might write when he was tired or overwhelmed. The letter was addressed to my financial advisor, a real man named Gary who I had known for years, and it discussed a large sum of inheritance money that had recently come in from a relative and that I intended to deposit within the next 2 weeks. The amount I mentioned in the letter was $85,000. There was no inheritance. There was no relative. There was no $85,000. I left the letter on my kitchen table, unsealed, next to a sticky note that said Mail Monday. I took a photo of it so I know exactly how I left it. Then I called Derek and told him I wasn't feeling great and asked if he and Vanessa could stop by on Sunday to help me with a few things around the house. He said, of course, Dad will be there. I spent Saturday doing absolutely nothing productive and watching old baseball games because I had earned it. Sunday came. They arrived around noon. Vanessa brought a pan of brownies, which I will say were genuinely excellent, and it is a shame that someone can be a thief and also a very competent baker. Life is full of contradictions. I made a point of being visibly tired, slower than usual. I mentioned my back was bothering me. I did this not because I am a natural actor, but because I have survived 67 years on this planet by paying attention to how people act around vulnerability. When you seem weaker, people who mean you harm relax. They get comfortable. I showed them a few things around the house that needed attention. A leaky faucet I had already fixed myself. A light bulb in the garage that I had also already changed. Small stuff, just reasons to have them there. Moving through the house, giving them the opportunity to see what I wanted them to see. At one point, I said I needed to lie down for a bit, and I went to the bedroom and closed the door, and I sat on the edge of the bed watching the app on my phone that showed the camera feeds. I watched the kitchen camera. It took 4 minutes. Vanessa walked into the kitchen. She stood at the counter for a moment. Then she moved to the table. She picked up the letter. She read it. I could not see her face clearly, but I could see her body language, and she went very still the way people do when they've just read something that matters to them. She put the letter down exactly where she found it. Almost exactly. A few degrees off. Like someone who is trying very hard to look like they never touched something. She walked back to the living room. I waited. 20 minutes later, I heard Derek's voice in the hallway saying he was going to check on Dad. He knocked. I said, "Come in." He came in and sat in the chair by the window and asked how I was feeling. We talked for a few minutes. He mentioned very casually that he had been thinking about helping me put some of my money into a safer investment vehicle. He said with everything going on with the market, it might be smart to consolidate some accounts. Keep things simple. He said he could set it all up for me if I wanted. He just needed me to sign a few authorization forms. I told him that sounded like a good idea and that we could talk about it next time. He smiled and said, "Sure, no rush." He just wanted to look out for me. I smiled back and said I knew he did. We are both apparently very good at things we do not advertise. That night, after they left, I sat at my kitchen table, and I laid everything out in front of me like a building inspector documenting a condemned structure. The camera footage of Vanessa reading the letter. The bank records Barbara had helped me print. The log from Meadow Ridge showing Vanessa's visits under V. Whitfield. A statement I had written out from memory of everything Linda had told me. A list of every piece of jewelry I believed was missing from Eleanor's box. A note about Walter's watch. And Derek's offer that very afternoon to help me consolidate my accounts right around the time I had supposedly received $85,000. I called Gary, my financial advisor. Real Gary. I explained the situation and asked him what I needed to do. Gary was not an emotional man, but by the end of the call, he was very quiet in a way that felt a lot like controlled outrage. He told me to freeze my accounts immediately, add passwords to everything, and remove Derek's access to the portal. He said he would walk me through it step by step. He stayed on the phone with me for an hour and 15 minutes that evening and did not charge me for it. Then I called a lawyer, a friend of a friend named Gregory Holt, who had the kind of practice that dealt with elder financial abuse. I had never heard the term elder financial abuse applied to my own situation before that phone call, and I will tell you that hearing it out loud, directed at your own life, hits differently than you expect. I sat up a little straighter. I think because giving something a name makes it real. And when it's real, you can fight it. Gregory told me to document everything and not to tip my hand. He said what I had was already significant, but that if I could get more, it would be cleaner. He said the inheritance letter trap was, and I am quoting here, genuinely clever. I told him I used to be a building inspector. He laughed and said it showed. Now, what happened over the next 2 weeks is where the story gets interesting, because I had made an error, a small one, but it mattered. When I told Barbara about the plan, the letter, the fake inheritance, I thought I had kept it tight. Just me and Barbara and Gary and Gregory, 4 people. What I had forgotten was that Barbara had a sister named Donna who lived 2 streets over, and Donna's husband Carl was friendly with Derek's coworker. Columbus is a big city with a very small social network when you scratch the surface, and gossip moves faster than any car I have ever driven. I found out about this on a Wednesday when Derek called me and his voice had a particular texture to it. Not quite normal, a little too careful. "Hey, Dad," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," I said. "Back still a little stiff." Good. A pause. "Hey, I was thinking." Maybe we should do that thing I mentioned sooner rather than later. With the accounts, I have some time this weekend if you want. He was accelerating. He was trying to get to the money before I did anything with it. Now at this point, Gregory had already filed a protective order on my accounts and we were building the documentation. But I needed a little more. Specifically, I needed Derek on camera or on record actively trying to access my finances under false pretenses. The fake inheritance letter had gotten Vanessa on camera reading it. I needed Derek. So I told him, sure, come Saturday. Bring the papers. I also called Gregory on Thursday and told him what was happening. He said, perfect. He said to let Derek come, let him lay out his plan, and to have my phone recording the conversation. I spent Friday evening in the kitchen, cooking a pot of chili and thinking about the 41 years I had spent being that man's father, teaching him to throw a baseball in the backyard, driving him to school every morning for 6 years because he missed the bus. So often it became its own family joke, sitting in waiting rooms at 2 a.m. when he had his appendix out, walking him down an actual aisle at his wedding because Vanessa had a father, but Derek wanted me up there too, and I had felt something in my chest that day that I still can't fully describe. I thought about Eleanor, about whether she had known. I decided she hadn't. Eleanor would have burned this house down before she let this happen. She was the gentlest woman I ever knew, but there was iron underneath. That woman had iron. I thought about Walter, sitting in his room at Meadow Ridge, wearing no watch on the wrist where one had lived for half a century. Walter, who had trusted family the way you trust gravity. Not because you think about it, but because it simply never occurs to you that it could let you down. I sat with all of that. And then I put somewhere deep and closed the door on it, because I needed to be clear-headed on Saturday. Saturday came the way mornings do when you've barely slept, too fast and too bright. Derek arrived at 11. Vanessa was with him. They had a folder, an actual manila folder with papers inside it. I almost admired the organization. You have to respect commitment to a bit, even when the bit is fraud. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Vanessa had stood reading my fake letter 2 weeks earlier. The camera on the shelf caught us all in frame. My phone was in my shirt pocket, recording audio. Derek opened the folder. He had printed out some documents. He explained that he wanted to help me set up a trust, a family trust, that would make it easier to manage my assets and avoid probate down the line. Very sensible, very well presented. He said he would be listed as trustee, which was standard for this kind of arrangement, and that it would give him the ability to manage things on my behalf. He slid a signature page across the table. I picked it up, read it, or at least pretended to be reading it slowly the way old men read things when they're not wearing their glasses. This gives you control over the accounts, I said. It's just a formality, Derek said. You'd still have full access. And the new money coming in, I said. The inheritance. That would go in here. He tried to keep his face neutral. He was good at it. He almost managed it. Yeah, he said. It would make sense to consolidate everything. I put the paper down. I folded my hands on the table. And I looked at my son the way I used to look at buildings that were structurally unsound. With complete clarity, no emotion, just the truth of what was in front of me. Derek, I said, there is no inheritance. The room went very quiet. I made it up, I said. I wrote a fake letter and left it on this table, and Vanessa read it and told you about it, and you drove here today to try to get my signature on papers that would give you control of my money. And this is the part where I tell you that I have been recording this conversation. The cameras in this room have been recording since the day after I noticed Vanessa wearing your mother's earrings. And I have a lawyer who has spent the last 2 weeks building a case about $24,000 missing from my savings account and an unknown number of pieces of your mother's jewelry missing from her box. and a watch that belonged to your Uncle Walter that disappeared around the same time Vanessa started, making unauthorized visits to his care home. I paused. I gave you every opportunity, I said. I watched and waited, and I gave you every opportunity to stop, to come to me, to tell me you'd made a mistake. You didn't. If this story is making you feel something right now, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, I want you to subscribe, because there's more, and the ending matters. Don't miss it. What happened after that conversation is something I have described to several people, and they all react the same way, with a kind of stunned silence followed by a lot of questions. Vanessa started crying immediately, the kind of crying that is more performance than feeling, the kind where the tears arrive faster than the emotion. And she said she was sorry, and that things had gotten out of hand, and that Derek had pushed her. Derek stared at the table and said nothing for almost 2 full minutes. Then Derek looked up and said the most hollow thing I have ever heard a person say in my presence. He said, "Dad, we were going to pay it back." I have heard a lot of things in 67 years. That sentence landed somewhere near the bottom of the list. I told them both to leave my house. I told them I would not be calling the police today, which was not generosity. It was because Gregory had advised me that a civil case would recover more money than a criminal charge, and that a criminal charge could always come later. But money recovered civilly was money in my account, not just justice on paper. I also told Vanessa to remove Eleanor's earrings and place them on the kitchen table before she walked out that door. She did. They left. I sat in the kitchen alone, and I looked at the earrings on the table. Pearl and gold, 30 years of marriage, a husband who had saved up for 2 months to afford them, a woman who had worn them on every anniversary dinner for the rest of her life. I picked them up, and I held them in my palm, and I stayed there for a while. What followed over the next 3 months was less dramatic than the confrontation, but more satisfying in the way that real justice usually is. Slow, methodical, and final. Gregory filed the civil suit. Between my account, a separate account of Walter's that had also been quietly accessed through a power of attorney document that Walter had been manipulated into signing during a period of confusion, and the appraised value of the missing jewelry, including Eleanor's pieces, we were looking at a total of just over $61,000. The jewelry, it turned out, had been sold. Barbara helped me track down a consignment shop on the east side of Columbus that had received several pieces matching descriptions I provided. The shop had records, receipts, a name. The name was Vanessa Whitfield. A gemologist helped me positively identify Eleanor's diamond pendant from a photograph the shop had taken before sale. The shop had sold it to a woman in Westerville for $1,200. The original price I had paid was $3,400. Eleanor had worn it for 18 years. The Omega Seamaster that had belonged to Walter was found through a different avenue. There is a private Facebook group, and yes, I am on Facebook. I am 67 on 107, dedicated to vintage watch collectors in Central Ohio. Gregory's paralegal posted a description and a serial number that I had found in Walter's old insurance records. A man in Dublin, Ohio, had purchased it from an estate sale 3 months prior through a seller he had met online. The seller's contact information matched a secondary email address that we later traced back to Derek. The watch was recovered. When I drove it out to Meadow Ridge and placed it on Walter's wrist on a Tuesday afternoon in January, Walter looked at it for a long time. On that particular day, he was having a clear day, the kind where he knew exactly who I was and where we were. He held his arm up and looked at the watch, and then he looked at me and said, "Ray, where did you find this?" I told him I had done some detective work. He laughed. Walter has a laugh that starts low in his chest and comes out surprised every single time, like he forgot he was going to laugh. He did that in a care home in Gahanna, Ohio, on a Tuesday in January. I did not cry until I got to the parking lot. The civil settlement came in February. Derek and Vanessa did not fight it. Gregory told me that people rarely fight when the documentation is airtight, and ours was airtight. He had the camera footage, the audio recording, the bank records, the jewelry receipts, the care home logs, the watch trail. The settlement required them to pay back the full $61,000 plus legal fees over a structured arrangement that Gregory ensured was ironclad and tied to consequences if they defaulted. It also required a formal no-contact order with Walter's care home. They could not visit. They could not call. They could not send anyone on their behalf. Derek lost his visitation rights with me by his own doing. I did not issue a statement. I did not post anything anywhere. I did not call relatives and broadcast what had happened. I simply became unavailable. Calls went unanswered. The Sunday dinners stopped. The house that had always had a light on for family had a light on still, just not for him. Word got out anyway. It usually does. Columbus is a big city with a very small social network. I received a card from Derek in April, handwritten, 4 pages. I read it once, put it in a drawer, and have not read it again. I do not know what I will do with it eventually. That is a decision for a future version of me who has had more time. Vanessa, to my knowledge, has not reached out at all. I respect the consistency at least. Here is what I want to say about all of it, now that it's done. I am not a man who was raised to distrust his own family. My parents, God rest them, would have been horrified by every part of the story. My father shook hands to close deals and never once had a contract broken. My mother left her front door unlocked for 60 years because she said anyone desperate enough to walk through it uninvited needed something she could probably offer anyway. I carry those people in me. I carry Eleanor. I carry Walter's laugh in the Meadow Ridge parking lot. What happened with Derek and Vanessa did not break those things in me. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters. It would have been easy to let it. Easy to look at that manila folder on my kitchen table and decide that people are fundamentally rotten and trust is a luxury no one can afford. I understand why people arrive at that conclusion. I do not blame anyone who does. But I watched Barbara spend an hour on a laptop for me without asking why. I watched Gary stay on a phone call for over an hour because it was the right thing to do. I watched Gregory handle my case like it was personal to him because he believed that what happened to me and to Walter was wrong, and that wrongness deserved to be corrected. I watched Linda at Meadow Ridge, who apologized to me on behalf of a system that had let something slip through, not because she was legally obligated to, but because she had a conscience. There is more of that in the world than the other thing. I genuinely believe that. Eleanor's earrings are back on her dresser, back in the box. I opened the jewelry box for the first time in 2.5 years, and I placed every recovered piece back where it belonged. And I stood there for a moment, and I talked to her the way I do sometimes when no one is around. I told her what had happened. I told her I had handled it. And then I told her about the chili I made on Friday, because you have to maintain a balanced relationship even across whatever this distance is. And she had always wanted updates on my cooking progress, and I think she would have had some notes. Walter's watch is ticking again, 14 floors up in a care home in Gahanna, on the wrist of a 72-year-old retired accountant who can't always remember my name but still has his father's watch and his brother's twice-monthly visits and a bag of peanut butter crackers waiting on the chair. And I am 67 years old, and I am, in this particular moment, all right.